Hello, I'm Mark, and this is the Fast Track Impact podcast for researchers who want to be more productive and achieve real-world impacts from their research. Today, I want to have a think about the relationship between teaching and impact. So I'm going to do this in a couple of ways. First of all, I'm going to have a think about what we do in the lecture theatre and how impact can enable us to be better teachers, but maybe what we can learn from teaching for impact as well. We'll see how it goes. The second way I want to have a think about this is in terms of pedagogical impacts and how we might be able to go about evaluating this type of impact. It's been a fairly long day. I'm in a hotel room in Milton Keynes, of all places. The glamour of my job has taken me to this wonderful town. I am training at the Open University tomorrow, wedged between 2 days of teaching in Newcastle. So that's why I was today. I was teaching a wonderful class of undergraduates, all about social ecological systems and going to the level of values and nature. So it was quite fun. We got to have a birdsong interlude where people had to listen to birdsong and look at nice pictures of forests and think about the values that brought to mind. It's quite fun getting to teach the stuff that I get to teach, I will say. What I want to have a think about, though, is the kind of lessons that you can learn from impact for your research, for your teaching, and vice versa from your teaching for impact. And for me, this is something that has gone and does go both ways on a regular basis. So first of all, let's have a think about this in terms of what you can learn from your students and from teaching for research impact. And I'm going to suggest this works on two levels, actually. So the first is on a fairly deep level. And this is going to bleed into what I wanted to say about what we can learn from research impact, because this is about a spirit, an attitude that is humble enough to be able to learn from your students. And this might sound a bit challenging because, well, hey, we're the lecturers, we're the people with the PhDs and the research track record and the knowledge. And isn't it our job to be imparting this knowledge? Well, I think as most of us realise, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Students aren't just sponges, and it needs to be two-way. But for me, the first thing that I think we can learn is humility, because I think that if you can practice genuine humility with your students, then that for me is one of the biggest tests in terms of them being able to be genuinely humble with whoever you end up coming into contact with, whether they be publics or stakeholders or project partners, or whoever, when it comes to research impact. And it is that spirit of humility that enables us to learn deeply, to listen well, and to hear the things that might actually enable us to adapt what we do to genuinely meet needs. And in many cases, especially for more co-productive research, that enables us to actually make better decisions that go better for people. So the first thing that I've really learned from my teaching for impact is humility and that test especially with the more challenging students who are just a million miles away from the mark in terms of where they're meant to be, and not judging them, not getting frustrated, and opening that channel of empathy and saying, okay, I see where you're at. You're tired. You're hungover. You've got other priorities at the moment, and let's try and find a place where this somehow excites you, is interesting enough, or perhaps it's just about getting through, getting a good enough mark, which is perhaps not where I'm at, but it's where you're at. And from that place of empathy, getting to a place where, you know what, yeah, I felt like that when I was a student sometimes. And there's plenty of other times in my life where I just know I've got to survive, I've got to get through, I've got to do enough. And you know what, we are equals. The fact that you're in a slightly different place to me academically, with some different attitudes and values towards your academic work, doesn't mean that I get to judge you and to think that you're rubbish and I'm great. So a real test of humility. The other thing that I've had great experience with is trying out methods with my classes. So quite a lot of the participatory methods that I've used with stakeholders, I have tried out, first of all, with students. Students are very forgiving, I found, when you try techniques out and they don't quite work. My most scary experience of this, where I loved it the most, and actually acknowledged this class in the acknowledgements of the paper that eventually came out of this bit of work, was where I had designed a new piece of participatory research, and it was very much impact-based stuff, working with stakeholders, and we wanted to do something a bit different. So we designed this technique that was meant to be highly interactive and fun, and yet it was going to help us all learn from each other. And I wasn't 100% sure if it was going to work. So I had a class the day before, and it was a relevant enough class that I could try this technique out. And to my surprise and somewhat horror, I discovered that my technique didn't work. It was fundamentally flawed. It was a practical thing, but it just would not work in reality. And my class was amazing. Because by the end of it, the time was up. It was at the end of the day, so there was no class coming after us. And about half the class, I kind of called time in the class and said, "Okay, so we can learn from this." And then the other half of the class stayed late and actually worked with me to try and redesign this method so it would actually work the next day. And the next day, sure enough, I went out into the Peak District National Park, and we tried this technique with some actual real farmers and gamekeepers and conservationists, and it worked amazingly. But it would have been embarrassing, to say the least, had I not had the chance to try it out. If you're having a think about using a few more techniques like this, whether it's just a few basic things with post-it notes and things like that, and you just don't have that much confidence, it's surprising how much more confidence you get knowing that you've at least done it once before and it's worked and people have just gone with it. And class can be a great place for doing that. And my experience is that students love it as well. It's more interactive. They enjoy the experience more. And in that particular case, they felt a real sense of ownership of, wow, we're actually helping co-develop this technique with our lecturer and we can see it works now. And of course, they got the feedback the next week when I came in and said, ta-da, it worked, guys, and I'm going to acknowledge you in the paper. So motivational, fun, and great. Which then leads me to the second way of thinking about our lecturing, which is the ability that we have to inspire our students. I think that class was inspired by that experience as much as I was inspired by their generous and thoughtful critical help that day. And of course, this is not a one-way process of us as experts, students as sponges soaking in the knowledge. And I think for those of us who teach, I've yet to meet in certainly my new job. It's not new anymore. I've been here almost 3 years since I've moved to Newcastle. I've yet to find anyone who views the learning relationship as that kind of sponge or kind of sender and receiver of knowledge kind of thing. And it's because it just simply doesn't work. And if you want any evidence of that, just watch how many people fall asleep during your lectures, and you'll know that you've maybe got this not quite right. And so it's surprising. I think most of us have worked out now that that is an outmoded way of teaching. And we tend to do things which are much more interactive now in terms of our teaching. And yet, very many of us still have exactly the same outmoded view of knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer, and impact. And if we view knowledge as this gift that we, as the experts, have to give to others, this idea of knowledge transfer or technology transfer, then we ignore the reality that the knowledge that we have in this gift, when it gets unwrapped by the person who receives it, will very often be perceived as something radically different to what we thought we'd wrapped up and given to them in the first place. And then ends up getting used in a radically different way and passed on to someone else in yet another way. Knowledge is living, it changes, it is perceived in different ways by different people depending on their context. And we need to understand that. And the more interplay there is, the more interaction there is, the more opportunities there are for discussion, for questions, the more likely it is that people learn deeply. And in the same way that we understand that, I hope already, in terms of the learning and teaching we do in the lecture theatre, this is something that is pretty easy for us to then apply in terms of the work we do with our publics and stakeholders as part of our pathways to impact on our research projects. And for me, then coming back to that lesson about humility, this is for me a process that can, in many cases, be very much an exchange of knowledge. And I like this, where possible, to happen with my students. Yes, I might have more expertise than all my students, but when I look across that classroom, there are people with experience that is way more diverse in terms of life experience, the context that they are coming from. And actually, the more that I create opportunities for engagement within the classroom, the more I get to learn from that experience. And there are many lecture type experiences, seminar type experiences, where I come out having felt like I've learned from my students. That is actually a possibility in the lecture theatre, and is more than a possibility when we're working with stakeholders and publics. We need to have the humility to genuinely listen and learn, and for this to be an exchange. Well, this is my expertise and what I know and my experience, and I want to hear now what this looks like and sounds like from your experience and what you've got to bring and what you've learned from everything that has happened to you. And it really can be a beautiful experience when we learn to listen to that depth. And I guess the final thing that I can say about this two-way relationship between impact and teaching is to turn it the other way around and look at what our teaching can benefit from our work on impact. And especially if you work in an applied discipline, this is really, really important. What I've discovered through my career is that the closer and closer I get to impact and the more engaged I am with impact, the more I can bring that into the classroom, and I make things way, way more real to my students. There are a few ways in which I think that really helps people. So on one level, I'm making the workplace a lot more real to them. So I'm now out there working with practitioners on the ground and bringing back that lived experience of what is working, what are the challenges, and I've got the stories. I've been out in my boots and I've gotten muddy, and I've got some funny or scary stories to tell from my experiences. And there's that sense of lived reality that, yeah, this stuff is real. This is not just theory. It's not just academic stuff. This is real stuff. And actually, I can see now how Mark is applying what he's teaching us in practice, and I can see how I might apply this stuff in practice, and great. So you get that sense of lived reality, and you're inspired in terms of what you might do with this knowledge, and you're more motivated to listen, to pay attention, to engage more deeply with the content. I think there is also just at a higher level the sense of inspiration that you can bring to your classroom when you're able to bring your lectures, your seminars, your workshops to life with stories from your experience with impact. And as you begin to weave narratives that explain how things work in practice, there's that sense that, you know what, we are on the cutting edge here. Now, we're working with this professor in class, and unlike whatever else I've seen and heard in university, which has all been very much theoretical, for the first time it feels like this is real. And this is on the cutting edge of practice, not just on the cutting edge of theory or of methods. And that sense of, wow, I could do that, and wow, that might actually change the world. And you know what? We're some of the first people in the world to hear about this incredible story, this incredible new opportunity, this new technology, this new policy, whatever it is. So this is an opportunity not only to learn from your students and enrich your own practice as someone who wants to generate impact more effectively. As you generate impact and you learn from your mistakes and have success stories to share with your students, actually you get to bring impact into the classroom to inspire your students as well. The second thing that I think is really useful for us to think about in terms of the relationship between teaching and impact is pedagogy. And this is a fairly unique type of research impact. In the UK, in the Research Excellence Framework, this is a unique type of impact that is eligible, that we can claim as impact. I often say to the people that I train in the UK, just because something is eligible doesn't mean that it is necessarily strategic. And for me, the jury is out in terms of how strategic or not submitting pedagogical impacts might be to something like the REF. But putting REF aside, I think that there are a number of ways in which we can push pedagogical impacts so that they become so unambiguously beneficial and inspiring that these are things that we want to pursue, whether or not we're doing this for REF, and they become things that are very easy to evidence to a high level. So pedagogical impacts are basically the idea that from your research now, you have changed the way that your discipline is taught. Students now have new knowledge, they have new techniques or methods, new ways of doing things that they did not have before you had done your research. And although in theory you could just say, I did this for my class in my university, and that might well be an eligible impact, it's not that impressive. Typically what we're looking at is evidence that actually you've changed the way that people across the world, across your discipline, are taught now based on your work. For many of the people who come to me with pedagogical impacts, this is the person who wrote the book, and their book has now been used in courses all over the world, and it's changed how something is taught. So Guy Garrod, for example, the director of the Centre for Rural Economy, which is where I work at Newcastle University, has written one of those kind of game-changing textbooks on environmental economics, which is used all over the world. Are you one of those people? If so, that's fairly lucky. It's definitely not me. But maybe you are one of those people. Well, hey, you may well have a pedagogical impact. Now, the way that you go about evidencing that would typically be to see, well, who now in different courses around the world teaches things based on your methodology, on your approach, on your theory, or whatever it is that you did to change the face of your discipline. And you would be then looking for evidence of reach. So I want the number of different universities and the number of different countries. I want, if I can, get evidence of the number of students. maybe even the range of different disciplines that this is or sub-disciplines that this has gone into, and I'm going to want to delve into a bit of depth now, and for a few of them I'm going to want to get some evidence of how that has come across to the students and what the students can now do and how this has changed their perception, their learning outcomes, but potentially perhaps a little more than that as well. And this is for me where it starts to get exciting. Now, this doesn't work as well for everyone as it does for some. It works in particular very nicely for more applied disciplines. And so what we're doing now is we're designing our teaching as an intervention. And if you want this to travel, then you need to create this as an intervention in your book, where you to create an online tool or resource kit or something like that that very clearly turns this into some kind of intervention now. And so now I'm working in, physiotherapy. I'm teaching physiotherapy, and based on my research, there is a new type of therapy that is taught all over the world that I invented based on my research. I've got evidence based on a randomized controlled trial that this actually delivers incredible benefits for patients, which is why everyone's taken it up and everyone teaches it. Fantastic. That's maybe too obvious an example, but this could perhaps be a theory that enables people to understand how. Let me have a think about this. So maybe some of the work that I've done on payments for ecosystem services. So we've got something now which is theoretically a different way of funding nature conservation. And if we can design this now as an intervention, so it's not just, well, here's a good idea, what do you think? But now here is a set of methods that you can use to design your own payment for ecosystem service scheme in the workplace. And if you go into X, Y, and Z different types of role professionally, then perhaps these are some of the examples of ways in which you can do these things. Or in fact, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, I'll be teaching participatory methods, and I will be emphasizing to my students the methods that I'll be teaching them, some of which are based on my research, are things that I expect them to use in the workplace. And I'll be giving them examples of workplace scenarios that they are highly likely to come into in the workplace based on the kind of things that I know our students do after they graduate. And I'll explain exactly how they can apply these techniques in the workplace to solve those kinds of very specific problems. And we'll do some role play and some scenarios in the class as well to make it very clear, this is what you do when you get into these kinds of situations. This is how you deal with those kinds of difficult people, difficult contexts, difficult situations, and come out fairly unscathed. So I've got my intervention, and I'm now teaching this in a way that it is very clear to these students, yeah, I can use this beyond the classroom in the workplace. And now what I would need to do is to come up with a way of evaluating what happens next. So there are a few ways in which I can do this. So let's go with the easy option, which is fairly hit and miss, but I could now work with my alumni office. So I've got a cohort of students, and I have taught them all how to do something that they couldn't do before. And I am now going to be following up with them via the alumni office, and a year or two after this, I'm going to reach out to them and ask them some questions. And there'll be a few questions I might want to ask them, but one of them is going to be whether or not they are actually using any of the methods that I taught them in class. And if so, actually, are they working? And are they getting positive outcomes? And would they have been able to get those outcomes if they didn't know what they've learned in class? Another approach that I might take to this would be to try and incentivize my students to sign up to some kind of email list. So you're going to be graduating soon. If you want to stay in touch with the latest research and evidence and tips that will be relevant for you in the workplace after you leave university, so you stay up to date, then I recommend you sign up to this email list. Entirely voluntary, but if you do this, then I will update you maybe a couple of times a year. I'm not going to make this too onerous on myself. I'll probably double it up with some work on a newsletter for a project or something like this. But they're going to get some updates, and I'm going to add some value to them. And after a year or two, those who are still on that mailing list, I can send out a survey. And on that survey can be a little box at the end saying, would you be willing to be contacted for interview? And then based on the results of that, I get some survey data, I get some interview data that says, yeah, you know what, students who did this, yeah, we've got evidence that they got some nice learning outcomes and stuff while they were at university, but beyond their university course, they went into the workplace and they could do new things, and this is what the benefits were. And depending on what kind of things they are now doing, I'm asking them, so who are these customers of yours now who are benefiting in these various different interesting ways? What is the habitat, the non-human species that you have managed to protect as a result of this? Let's just kind of follow some lines here and find out actually how big, how deep, how broad, how cool is the impact that you've managed to achieve that you wouldn't have been able to achieve without that work. Now, if you've got something which is much more broadly situated, then you're going to have a wee think about how you can collect evidence for this. So I've heard of people who have gone through royal colleges, so the Royal College of Nursing, for example, or others that they've got connections with. So the assumption is this has now been taught to all new nurses across the country. And we're fairly sure we've got a pedagogical impact of that scale. What I now want to know is whether graduate nurses, knowing what they should in theory know, based on what I know about the pedagogical change across the sector, whether they actually do things differently as a result of that, and whether that new technique, that new bit of knowledge, that new way of doing something actually is delivering benefits for them in terms of their professional practice, for their patients, or something else like that. For something like that, I might take it a step further and say, well, okay, I haven't got the time or the money for a randomised control trial, but maybe I could work with some of my graduate nurses, or perhaps junior doctors if I've been doing medicine, to do an audit. And this is typically part of the career structure if you want to get on in medicine. And with a little bit of help, actually, I've now got a bunch of doctors in different hospitals doing audits and telling me, actually, you know what, these are the outcomes for patients. Now, this is maybe not as robust as a randomised control trial, and maybe I might want to do something like that one day. Maybe I did that already, and that's what got me into the curriculum, but yeah, lots of different ways in which I can think about evaluating whether these things actually become situated in the workplace and deliver benefits to the people that my students end up working with. Pedagogical impacts are, I think, a kind of a much maligned type of impact that people have tended to kind of steer clear of. So in Ref 2014, there was a general perception that it wasn't a good idea to submit pedagogical impacts, that you would get a lower score. Since then, various people have claimed that may well be the case. I don't have any evidence of that. The assumption is that they did well in education, but elsewhere, other than in education, they didn't do so well. I've had a look at the database that we have for our work on what made a 4-star impact case study. So that is 180, I believe, high versus low scoring case studies from across all of the different panels. So looking at the very far ends of that spectrum, so the very highest and the very lowest scoring ones. and there is no evidence of any kind of statistical difference between the scores received by pedagogical versus other impacts, because there isn't enough pedagogical impacts in that database. So this is just something that we can't even test. It's just not a possibility. So the jury is out in terms of whether or not that is a strategic thing to submit to the ref. But if you are in doubt about this, then I hope that through this episode you now have some ideas for what you might be able to do to evaluate pedagogical impacts in a way that would be fairly robust and that doesn't require the impact to remain in the classroom, that goes way beyond the classroom. Listen to your students. Listen to your stakeholders and publics as much as you listen to your students. Be inspired by your students as much as you are inspired by the stories and experiences of the stakeholders and publics that you come into contact with. And when you open that channel of empathy and you enter that place of humility, the likelihood is that you will inspire your students and that you will inspire those that you work with beyond the academy and that you achieve impact. There's a lot we can learn from teaching for impact, and I believe from our experience and practice of research impact for what we do in the classroom.